June 3rd, 2017. Dallas, Texas. After suffering a violent assault at the hands of a female acquaintance and her male companion, 27-year-old Armani Morgan goes missing. 7 weeks later, Armani's decomposed skull and 5 other bones are found in a nearby vacant residential lot, and since the police are inclined to believe that he succumbed to a drug overdose, his cause of death is listed as undetermined. In the days prior to his disappearance, Armani had been repeatedly assaulted and harassed by this female acquaintance, who allegedly fired a bullet through his window, but even though Armani's family suspects he was the victim of foul play, his death is never reclassified as a homicide. After that, the trail went cold. Hello everyone, and welcome to our latest episode of The Trail Went Cold. I'm your host Robin Warder, and today we're going to be covering a cold case in which the victim's family is fighting to seek justice: the 2017 death of Armani Morgan. I first became familiar with this story when I attended the AdvocacyCon event in Indianapolis this past March and met Armani's maternal aunt, Robin Johnson, who has become the family's official spokesperson. And since Robin has spent the past several years working diligently to spread awareness about his story, I wanted to cover it on this podcast. Just over 8 years ago, Armani Morgan went missing after being shot at and violently assaulted multiple times, before his skull and 5 additional bones were found in a nearby vacant residential lot 7 weeks later. But even though there was not enough evidence to determine Armani's cause of death, and the original homicide detective from the Dallas Police Department did not perform a thorough investigation, his death was pretty much written off as a drug overdose. While it was true that Armani had a history of drug use, there was still good reason to perform a full and thorough homicide investigation, as in the days prior to his disappearance, Armani had been physically assaulted on no less than 3 occasions by a female acquaintance who also made several harassing phone calls against him and allegedly fired a bullet through the window of his residence. In fact, this woman even went so far as to post a brief video clip of one of these assaults on Facebook, and 2 other men, one of whom was Armani's former same-sex partner, are also suspected of being involved in his death. Officially, Armani's cause of death is listed as undetermined, but Robin and the rest of her family are requesting that the Dallas Homicide Supervisory Officer and the Dallas Police Department pay for forensic testing on case evidence which was collected from the shooting at his apartment, as they believe it will be crucial in getting Armani's death reclassified as a homicide. Another major controversy surrounding this case is that in 2019, nearly 2 years after Armani's disappearance and brutal murder, the Dallas PD and several media outlets were exploring the murders and assaults of some black transgender women which had taken place in the Dallas area during that time period, but Armani's 2017 death were grouped in with these 2019 cases, and he was misidentified as transgender as well. Well, Armani's family have confirmed that while he liked to wear women's clothing from time to time, he was not transgender, and identified as a gay male who went by the pronouns he, him, even though many of the contemporary media accounts mistakenly referred to Armani by the pronouns she, her. His family is certain that these 2019 crimes committed against transgender women in Dallas do not have any connection to Armani's case, and suspect that his death was a personal crime which had nothing to do with his race, gender, or sexuality. I should also mention that Robin has been interviewed and shared Armani's story on John Lordan's YouTube series Brain Scratch, as well as the podcasts Method and Madness, The Fall Line, Intrigued Full Effect, and Hands Off My Podcast, True Crime. In addition, the case has received media coverage on a Dallas NBC5 News cold case segment, which was filmed at the actual crime scene location and aired in August of 2023. Fox 4 News and NBC5 News also performed on-camera interviews with Robin at Armani's Billboard site location for segments which aired on May the 19th and 20th of 2025. So now it is time for The Trail Went Cold to tackle this case. However, before we get started, just a quick reminder that The Trail Went Cold is a weekly podcast, which is currently available for download on several platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube Music, Podcast Addict, and more. So if you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it, and please leave us a rating or review at any of those sites to help spread the word. The Trail Went Cold is on Patreon, so if you would like to learn how to support the show, please visit our page at patreon.com/thetrailwentcold. For as little as $1 a month, you can garner access to exclusive rewards, including stickers and thank you cards, early access to episodes, and bonus content, as our Patreon page has over 80 exclusive bonus episodes in archives which are not available on a regular feed. So with all that out of the way, let us now explore the unexplained death of Armani Morgan. Our story begins in Dallas, Texas in 2017, and our victim is 27-year-old Armani Dante Morgan, who was raised by a single mother and was her only child. Since his mother was employed as a home health aide for senior citizens and was often out working, Armani pretty much grew up as a latchkey kid who spent a lot of time alone without supervision. While he never had a relationship with his biological father, Armani was very close to his maternal aunt, Robin Johnson, and her two daughters, who were more like sisters to him as opposed to first cousins. And since he hailed from a family which was mostly dominated by women, Armani was considered to be special since he was the first male grandchild to his grandparents, and he was known for having a bubbly, good-hearted personality and a gift for managing to bring everybody's spirits up whenever he was in their presence. During middle school, he came to the realization that he was gay and would develop an interest in home economics, fashion, and hairstyling. Armani also sometimes liked to dress up in women's clothing and carry a purse around, but like I mentioned in the intro, he did not identify as transgender. A big turning point for Armani was when his maternal grandfather passed away in 1999, as he always took good care of Armani and was the only father figure he had in his life. By the time he reached the 6th grade, Armani started hanging out with a group of friends who were a bad influence on him. In fact, he started skipping school, so his Aunt Robin would sometimes have to personally show up at his classes to ensure that Armani was in attendance and getting a proper education. Nevertheless, Armani eventually wound up in a juvenile facility due to truancy and decided to quit school. He also started using such drugs as marijuana, cocaine, and ice, and amassed an arrest record for such crimes as petty theft. At this particular point in his life, Armani is still living with his mother in an impoverished neighborhood in Oak Cliff, less than 1 minute away from the spot where some of his skeletal remains were later discovered. During the week of May 22, 2017, Armani would experience the first of numerous assaults at the hands of a former female friend who was assisted by her 2 teenage sons, and the first assault took place less than a mile from Armani's home. Since the known female perpetrator has never been publicly named as a suspect or person of interest by law enforcement, we will not be sharing her name here, but she and Armani had previously been arrested together for petty crimes. Since this known female perpetrator had several children, she received monthly benefits from the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, aka SNAP, and for a period of nearly 3 years, she would enlist Armani's help to sell a portion of these benefits for cash, which they used to purchase drugs. But at some point, something apparently went wrong with this arrangement, which prompted the known female perpetrator to develop a personal vendetta against Armani and lash out at him with the intent to cause him physical harm on 3 separate occasions prior to his son's disappearance and brutal death. During the week of May the 22nd, the first of the 3 violent assaults took place at a strip mall Armani liked to frequent, as he was tracked down and attacked by the known female perpetrator and her 2 teenage sons. Like I mentioned earlier, this incident took place less than a mile from Armani's home, and it was witnessed by several bystanders who have yet to come forward and speak with Dallas Police Department detectives. Armani did not report the assault to the police and laid low at his residence for the next 7 to 8 days, but on May the 30th, the female perpetrator made a non-stop series of threatening and harassing phone calls to the landline of Armani's home, which continued for around 24 straight hours. Armani still continued to lay low, but at around 5 p.m. on May the 31st, while he was watching TV on the living room couch, a bullet was suddenly fired through the window. His mother was in the back bedroom at the time, but when she heard the shot, Armani and his mother both went outside to ask bystanders if they had seen the shooter. Mrs. Morgan then paid a visit to the leasing office to speak with the manager. She asked if there was any surveillance footage available of the shooting, but even though there was a security camera outside a residence, it turned out to be inoperable. While she was speaking with the leasing manager, a resident informed Mrs. Morgan that Armani was being violently assaulted outside her front door. Armani's mother then flagged down a Dallas police officer who was patrolling the parking lot in his squad car. This officer then used his radios to dispatch other officers to the residence. It turned out that the known female perpetrator and her young daughter had surrounded Armani and repeatedly punched him while he attempted to defend himself. He was hit in the head and knocked to the ground, and as Armani's mother was rushing to the scene, the female perpetrator and her daughter fled the scene in an SUV before the police arrived. While a security camera did capture footage of the SUV speeding away, it had a stolen license plate attached to it, which belonged to another vehicle. Believe it or not, a 21-second video of the violent assault against Armani was filmed on a cell phone by another individual who was inside the SUV, and they proceeded to post the video on Facebook soon after the shooting and assault. An officer from the Dallas PD filed a report about the shooting incident and questioned some of the bystanders to see if any of them saw who fired the shot through the window of Armani's residence. But since the female perpetrator who assaulted Armani had once lived at the same apartment complex, and many of these bystanders were either loyal to her or fearful of her, they would not implicate her in the crime. The officer's report described the offense as, quote-unquote, deadly conduct and the discharge of a firearm, but oddly, it also contained two sentences which seemed to contradict each other. One of them said that a, quote-unquote, possible known suspect fired a single round through the complainant's window, but the second sentence read, quote, on listed date and time, unknown suspect fired a single shot into complainant's apartment. To make things even more confusing, the report also implicated another individual who had no involvement. Robin has insisted that she has no idea who this unknown individual is, nor where the officer got the information from. The Dallas PD has since told Armani's family that in order to correct any misinformation from the report, they would need to obtain an attorney. On June the 3rd, 3 days after the shooting incident, Armani was violently assaulted for the third time by the known female perpetrator who was assisted by a male perpetrator. Armani was bloodied and sought first aid from two female friends who attempted to clean him up, and one of them provided Armani with their cell phone number. Armani told his two friends that he had been tracked down to the Cedar Gardens apartments on Bonneview Road and assaulted for the third time by the known female perpetrator who was accompanied by a male accomplice. This guy was a low-level drug dealer within the community, as Armani and the female perpetrator sometimes bought drugs from him with the cash they made by selling off the female perpetrator's SNAP benefits. The male perpetrator reportedly held Armani down while the female perpetrator beat him up, but Armani said that he fought back by blackening the woman's eye, a detail which was later confirmed by a Dallas homicide detective. Since Armani's mother was at work at the time, his two friends tried to get a hold of his cousin, aka Robin's youngest daughter, to let her know what happened, but since she was also at work, she was unable to answer her phone. After Armani's friends rendered first aid to him, they went their separate ways, but this turned out to be the last time that Armani was heard from by those who knew and loved him. When Armani's cousin was finally able to answer her phone and was informed about the June 3rd assault, she left her workplace and went to Armani's residence to see him, but he was not there. She started asking around to try and figure out where Armani was, but she could not find him anywhere, which she found very concerning. They had a very close relationship, and Armani would always call her if and when he needed her assistance, but he had not attempted to make contact. She tried to report Armani missing to the Dallas PD via 911, but they pretty much shrugged the whole thing off since Armani was an adult, and they told her that he was free to take off if he wanted to. Armani's cousin even made an attempt to contact the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, aka Namus, but they recommended she contact the Dallas police, which meant that the family was essentially trapped in an endless cycle. Well, it turned out that on the day after Armani went missing, the known female perpetrator actually contacted the Dallas PD in order to file a report against Armani, alleging that he had assaulted her on June the 3rd. This was an attempt to draw police attention away from herself, knowing full well that Armani would never be able to refute her accusations alleging assault against her. The known female perpetrator had a black eye, but Robin has stated that two individuals who provided detailed accounts about the June 3rd assault against Armani have provided her with a play-by-play description of what happened, and they confirmed that Armani only gave the female perpetrator a black eye due to him fighting back and defending himself. However, these individuals who witnessed the June 3rd assault have failed to come forward to share their account of what happened with the authorities. When a detective interviewed the female perpetrator to inquire about why she had relentlessly pursued Armani, she claimed it was because he had stolen $400 from her EBT card, which carried her SNAP benefits. The problem is that using an EBT card requires a 4-digit personal code, and when the female perpetrator was asked about this, she acknowledged that she had given the code to Armani when she sent him to the store to use the card, which technically wouldn't have been stealing. Armani remained missing for 7 weeks, but on July the 24th, a plumber named Larry was driving away from his residence, which was located on a cul-de-sac in the Oak Cliff neighborhood near Bushman Park. When Good Samaritan Larry came to a halt midway through the cul-de-sac while approaching the stop sign at the corner of Balch Drive and Wilhurt Avenue, he noticed his neighbor's dog passing by, which appeared to be carrying a human skull in his mouth, so he climbed out of the vehicle and retrieved the skull before the dog ran off. Larry called 911 to report his discovery, but it took over 45 minutes for the police to arrive, and since he had a plumbing job scheduled, Larry left the skull on the ground for them to find. Ironically enough, this prompted another concerned witness to call 911 after they saw Larry put down the skull and drive away. The neighbor's dog had been walking near a vacant residential lot, so 3 different canine search and rescue handlers and each of their dogs split up into 3 different directions to perform a search of the lot, and they proceeded to find 4 bones nestled and concealed in a bushy area underneath a huge tree along the adjacent grassy wooded area. Once police finally arrived at the scene, they collected the human skull that had been left behind by Larry, in addition to a long bone which was lying in the middle of the residential street. One of the 3 canines and its handler were going to head deeper into the wooded area to keep searching, but the dog wound up getting injured on the brush and broken limbs and was unable to continue. This specific handler told police that the dog seemed to be hinting at the possibility of more remains and suggested that they return to the area to perform an additional search, but law enforcement never did so, and per the autopsy report, these are the only bones recovered to date. Some additional items were discovered at the scene, including a hairbrush and an article of clothing with rips and tears. A purse was also found containing some drug paraphernalia, a key fob for a Chrysler car, and a piece of paper with a phone number on it. When the police called this number, they learned that it belonged to one of the female friends who had rendered first aid to Armani following the assault on June the 3rd, as she had given him the cell phone number while he was bloodied and bruised. After being questioned by police about the discovery of her cell phone number at the crime scene, this woman then proceeded to contact her sister, who in turn notified Armani's cousin about what happened. The Dallas County Medical Examiner's Office death investigator contacted Armani's family on July the 31st, asking Armani's mother to submit her DNA for testing to compare with the remains. On October the 16th, Robin contacted the medical examiner's office and learned that Armani's mother's DNA was a match, so the remains were legally and positively identified as belonging to Armani. The vacant residential lot where Armani had been found was just around the corner from where he had lived in the area. Since there had been heavy rain and constant weather changes during the 7-week period Armani was missing, some of the items which were found at the scene had been embedded in the soil. The clothing which was uncovered matched the description of what Armani was last seen wearing, and it contained some rips and tears. Armani's family was particularly perplexed by the discovery of the Chrysler key fob inside his purse, as he did not own a vehicle. After Armani's remains were returned to his family, his mother elected to have him cremated during a graveside ceremony, and on the same day this took place, Armani's mother and Robin had a scheduled meeting with the detective who had been assigned Armani's case. The detective told them that due to the condition of the 6 skeletal remains, they were unable to determine Armani's exact cause of death, but since they had only recovered 6 remains that did not contain marks or noticeable trauma, foul play could not be determined at that time. However, due to drug paraphernalia being found in Armani's purse at the crime scene, the detective said that he believed Armani had died of a drug overdose. Of course, Armani's family was outraged by the detective coming up with this predetermined theory without toxicology reports nor a thorough homicide investigation, as the detective had only been working on the case for 17 days at that point, and the fact that Armani was repeatedly assaulted and had a bullet fired through his window in the days prior to his disappearance seemed to show a potential motive for homicide. Nevertheless, Armani's cause and manner of death were officially listed as undetermined on his death certificate. According to Armani's family, during the time period he was missing, the known female perpetrator told another person what she believed happened to Armani and shared some specific details which turned out to be true when his remains were found. Robin has said that in addition to the female perpetrator, 2 known male perpetrators were said to have involvement in Armani's tragic death. But once again, neither of these men have ever been publicly named as suspects or persons of interest by law enforcement, so we will not be using their names here. The first male perpetrator was a low-level drug dealer within the community, and like I mentioned earlier, he held Armani down during the assault that took place on June 3, 2017. The second male perpetrator was also a low-level drug dealer that Armani and the female perpetrator have bought drugs from, but he had also been Armani's same-sex partner for several years. This man also had a live-in girlfriend who eventually found out about a secret relationship and responded by making some harassing phone calls to Armani prior to his brutal death. By this time, Armani had already decided to end the relationship because his former partner had become increasingly violent with Armani once he announced that he no longer wanted to be involved in an intimate same-sex relationship. Armani's former partner was also known for threatening various people, including Armani, with a machete. In fact, Armani's family have received word from the community that he was attacked with a machete, and there's speculation that the rips and tears found on Armani's clothing could have been blade marks. Whenever Robin received any new tips or leads which seemed to point towards foul play and dispel the overdose theory, she would continually share them with the lead detective, but it does not appear that anything was ever done with this information. The discovery of Armani's remains got no media coverage after it originally happened on July 24, 2017, but nearly 2 years later, on May 19, 2019, the Dallas PD held a press conference at which time Armani's case was briefly thrust into the spotlight for unexpected reasons. The police discussed the murder of a 23-year-old black transgender woman named Malaysia Booker who had been shot to death the previous day. Law enforcement stated that Malaysia's death was the 4th murder or assault of a transgender woman which had taken place in Dallas within the past 2 years, so they were exploring potential connections. The other victims were 29-year-old Brittany White, who was fatally shot inside her car in October of 2018, and an unnamed transgender woman who was stabbed in April of 2019 but wound up surviving. However, the Dallas PD also grouped Armani's death with these other crimes, but mistakenly referred to him as an unidentified transgender woman whose remains were found in a vacant lot in July of 2017. And law enforcement did not initially identify Armani by his name, in spite of the fact that his skeletal remains had already been positively and legally identified by a match to his mother's biological DNA in October of 2017. In fact, it would not be until 4 weeks after the May 19, 2019 press conference when the media finally reported that this victim had been identified and they started using Armani's name, but many outlets continued to misidentify him as bones that had been found in a field. There was initial speculation that one male individual may have been responsible for all these murders, including Armani's tragic death, but on June the 12th, a 33-year-old suspect named Kendrell LeVar Lyles was arrested and charged with Malaysia Booker's murder. Lyles later pled guilty to the crime and received a 48-year prison sentence. Armani's family says that Kendrell LeVar Lyles did not have any involvement in Armani's death, which is completely unrelated to the other crimes against transgender women in Dallas. So, getting back to this case, Robin had spent 2 years asking the lead detective about performing forensic testing on the bullet, which was fired into Armani's home on May 31st, 2017. The detective initially told Robin that there was no bullet recovered on that date, but Robin knew that not to be true because she had managed to obtain crime scene photos from the Dallas PD via an open records request, and these photos clearly showed that a bullet had been collected from Armani's residence as evidence. Therefore, Robin continued asking the lead detective about the status of the bullet. 2 years went by, with the detective continually telling Robin that he would look into it, but he never did anything, and Robin eventually grew tired of this and requested that the detective be removed from Armani's case. On June 17, 2019, he was finally removed from the investigation. But unfortunately, during all the time Robin had spent repeatedly asking the detective about the status of the bullet, she would learn that the criminal offense of deadly conduct with a firearm had a 2-year statute of limitations in Texas, which officially expired on May 31st, 2019. Despite a 2-year window of opportunity expiring regarding the deadly conduct with a firearm criminal offense, the former assistant Dallas police chief authorized and approved forensic testing involving the bullet collected from Armani's residence. During an in-person meeting with the former assistant police chief, which took place at Dallas Police Headquarters on June 17, 2019, he attempted to sway Robin away from demanding the bullet be submitted for forensic testing by telling her that all biological DNA which is present on a bullet is automatically destroyed when it is fired and released from a gun's chamber. But Robin stood her ground in the meeting, disproving the assistant chief's theory as she had performed her own research into this matter. Robin provided the assistant chief with written information that she had learned about the Bardol method, a technique developed in September of 2016 by forensic specialist Francine Bardol that uses a sterile, wet vacuum system to recover and extract DNA from difficult-to-sample items, such as bullets after they've been fired from guns. On June the 27th, a new cold case detective was assigned to Armani's case, but during his 6 months in the role, he only performed one action, which was issuing a warrant regarding one of the 3 cell phone numbers belonging to Armani. In December of 2019, unbeknownst to Robin, she was invited to an ambush meeting with the cold case detective, the Dallas PD homicide supervisor, and another high-ranking officer. The meeting took place at police headquarters on January 2nd, 2020, at which time Robin described being berated and belittled as the Dallas PD homicide supervisor and the other officers told Robin that law enforcement had wasted enough time and money on Armani. They ultimately pulled the cold case detective from Armani's unsolved murder investigation that day. In November of 2019, one of the known male perpetrators, the low-level drug dealer who aided the female perpetrator in violently assaulting Armani on June 3rd, 2017, he wound up dead himself after he was shot and killed while committing another crime. As for the other male perpetrator, Armani's former same-sex partner, he was arrested for unrelated assault charges in August of 2017, only a few weeks after the unexpected discovery of Armani's skeletal remains on July 24th. He was only questioned by police on one occasion while he was incarcerated in the Dallas County Jail, denying to detectives that he had been in an intimate relationship with Armani. However, the same-sex partner did acknowledge having owned a machete, which is believed to have been used in Armani's tragic death. He would be sentenced to 8 years in state prison on the assault charges, but was released 1 year early in October of 2024, with a year-long probation which would involve wearing an ankle monitor that tracked his location to ensure compliance with the court-ordered conditions of his early release. However, on June 23, 2025, a warrant was issued for his arrest due to a violation of the conditions of his early release from state prison, proving that he should have remained in prison for the duration of his entire 8-year sentence and then some. As for the known female perpetrator who assaulted Armani, she has never been arrested for any crime and is still free today. In July of 2023, yet another detective was assigned to Armani's case. When Robin spoke with him, she inquired about the possibility of performing a new search for additional remains and evidence amongst the vacant residential lot where Armani's fragmented remains were found, but the detective said that the Dallas PD weren't planning to do so because the original police report has supposedly stated that law enforcement had no need to go back there. After Robin challenged the detective on this, a new canine search was performed, but the police have not shared any details about when exactly this new search took place or if any additional remains and/or evidence were found. The detective also told Robin that the Dallas PD was open to performing new forensic testing on the bullet recovered from Armani's residence on May 31st, 2017, and would use the Bardol method to extract DNA. However, they have since gone back on their word, stating that Francine Bardol is not certified or qualified for this. In May of this past year, Armani's story received a boost from the tireless advocacy work of my friend Haley Gray, one of the best researchers in true crime, as well as Gabby Petito's mother, Nicole Schmidt, who teamed up with the Lamar advertising company Give Back initiative involving unsolved cold cases in Dallas, Texas. A digital billboard featuring Armani's photo and the words, "Who Killed Armani Morgan?" was displayed along the eastbound side of Interstate 30 near Peak Street in Dallas, and his family is hoping and praying that this exposure will lead to new information that finally brings about a resolution in this case. Robin told the media, quote, "It's only going to take that one witness to come forward and provide that big break in Armani's case, which is what we're hoping and praying for. Please come forward. Armani's mom deserves answers. Our family deserves answers. We want justice for Armani, which he rightfully deserves." End quote. A petition has also been started at change.org. Armani's family wants the Dallas PD to perform forensic testing on the bullet fired into his home and conduct an expanded search of the crime scene where Armani was found on July 24th, 2017, in order to look for additional skeletal remains, including any other possible evidence. His family also wants the Dallas PD to submit Armani's specific case evidence for forensic testing, which can officially change Armani's manner of death from undetermined to homicide. After 4.5 months of Robin repeatedly submitting several email requests asking the Dallas PD to authorize and approve an investigative review of Armani's case by the Texas Rangers Cold Case Unit, a Texas Ranger was finally assigned to perform an investigative review of Armani's case back in 2021. Unfortunately, the Texas Ranger has dropped the ball over the past 4 years, failing to pursue and investigate Armani's case. Although the Ranger was assigned by the Dallas PD in February of 2021, he informed Robin in December of 2021 that his regular duties took priority over Armani's unsolved murder. So, for the moment, Armani's death continues to remain an unsolved cold case. So I guess you could say the trail went cold. So like I mentioned in the intro, I first learned about this case when I met Robin Johnson at AdvocacyCon this past March, and a recurring theme that I saw with many of the victims' families who attended the event is that they are all incredibly frustrated at the lack of action from police on their loved ones' cases, which is why they have approached true crime podcasts and creators about getting these stories out there. The investigation, or lack thereof, into the death of Armani Morgan is particularly frustrating because law enforcement wrote him off as being the victim of a drug overdose, even though he was found disposed of in a vacant residential lot and hidden in an obscured position secured between bushes underneath a huge tree, and there is no evidence to support the original detective's predetermined theory about a drug overdose. Now, I've seen plenty of cases in which a victim's death was officially ruled to be accidental or a suicide, even though their families insisted that foul play took place, and sometimes you get the sense that the original conclusion was the correct one, and these loved ones are in denial and trying to find someone to blame as a means of dealing with their grief. While it is true that Armani had a history of drug use, his family has always been very transparent about it. His Aunt Robin believes that Armani's unhappiness started over the absence of his biological father, who was never part of Armani's life due to his father being ashamed of Armani being a gay male, and this played a significant role in Armani's history of drug use. But putting that aside, the big issue with rushing to the conclusion that Armani succumbed to an overdose in a vacant residential lot is that all the Dallas PD homicide unit ever found was Armani's skull and 5 other bones, so it was impossible to determine his exact cause of death. It would be one thing if Armani did not have any known enemies and lived an uneventful life, but in the week and a half prior to his death, he was assaulted on no less than 3 occasions by the same female perpetrator, who also made a series of harassing phone calls to Armani and his mother's home, and is suspected of being the actual shooter who fired a bullet through their living room window. And in relation to the assaults against Armani, the known female perpetrator literally filmed one of them on May the 31st, 2017, the same day as the shooting at Armani's residence, and posted it on Facebook. Yes, with a limited amount of Armani's remains, we cannot prove or disprove the possibility of foul play, but we clearly have 3 known suspects with a motive to want him dead. Any good investigator will tell you that you should initially treat every death scene as a potential homicide and only move in another direction if the evidence leads you there. But here, it appears that the original detective from the Dallas PD did the exact opposite, negatively impacting the case from the outset by inserting his personal predetermined theory that Armani's death was an overdose after only 17 days of being in charge as lead detective and not performing a thorough investigation and disregarding all evidence which pointed towards homicide. One of the biggest arguments that Robin has used against the detective's predetermined overdose theory is that if Armani wanted to overdose on drugs, he easily could have done so at home, as opposed to a vacant residential lot hidden in an obscure position between bushes underneath a huge tree, especially since Armani was home alone while his mother was working. It doesn't make much sense for him to walk across the corner less than 1 minute away from his home to this vacant lot and then use drugs in a heavily wooded area. Not to mention that when Armani was last seen alive on the day of his disappearance, he had been assaulted and bloodied up, so I think he would be much more inclined to go to a safe place and stay indoors. It really seems like law enforcement felt that Armani was a victim who was not worth investigating and just decided to push him and his tragic death to the side. So if you look through the news archives, you'll see that Armani's death and the discovery of his remains did not receive any media coverage at all in 2017, and I believe the first time he ever got mentioned publicly was when the Dallas PD held a press conference in May of 2019 to discuss the murder of Malaysia Booker and its possible connection to crimes against a few transgender women from the Dallas area. But instead of using Armani's name, the police simply referred to him as, quote-unquote, bones found in a field nearly 2 years earlier, even though Armani's remains had already been positively and legally identified. It was not until a few weeks after this 2019 press conference when the media revealed that this victim had been identified as Armani Dante Morgan, but the reporting was very sloppy and confusing because they made it sound like Armani's identification had just taken place when it actually occurred on October the 16th, 2017, via a match to his mother's biological DNA. But sadly, the misinformation about Armani being transgender had already spread so much that his aunt, Robin Johnson, has spent the past several years trying to correct that false narrative. In fact, when one prominent media outlet interviewed Robin about Armani's case in June of 2019, the online news website journalist Justin Glaw flat out lied. Although Robin informed the journalist that Armani identified as a gay male and was not transgender, the journalist still reported Armani as being transgender anyway and has never gone back to retract his false narrative. The journalist's false narrative stemmed from the 2019 murder of Malaysia Booker and other violent assaults against the LGBTQ community, and he wanted to sensationalize his story about Armani's disappearance and tragic death to gain the public's interest for clicks and views. I think this whole misconception about Armani's gender was based on the fact that he sometimes liked to dress in female clothing and carry a purse, which was one of the items found at the crime scene alongside his skeletal remains. I guess you could say the whole situation is a bit ironic, because there's often concern about crimes against transgender victims not getting the proper attention they deserve from the media, but here, the only reason Armani's death got any attention at all was because he was misidentified as transgender. Of course, the biggest issue with this is that police were exploring potential connections between numerous crimes against black transgender women, which is all well and good on its own, but none of these other crimes had any relevance to Armani's case and may have muddied the investigation. and Armani was pretty much treated as an afterthought because they barely even discussed his case individually and would only lump it in with the other crimes. Malaysia Booker's killer, Kendrell LeVar Lyles, was eventually charged and convicted of her murder, but I'd say there's zero chance that he had anything to do with Armani's death. Regardless, Malaysia Booker's murder would later be featured on an episode of the MTV series True Life Crime, and while they still made a brief mention of its possible connections to Armani's case, they never reached out to his family to learn any details about what happened to him, and the only photograph they displayed of Armani was a mugshot from one of his arrests. Now, even though it's common practice for the true crime community to try and paint victims in the best possible light, we have to acknowledge that Armani Morgan was not perfect, and his Aunt Robin has been very open about the fact that he made a number of mistakes. Armani did use drugs, though things did not reach the point where he struggled with addiction issues, and he also had a prior history with the law, though it was mostly for petty thefts under the amount of $500. And of course, the known female perpetrator who is suspected of being involved in Armani's death solicited his help with selling a portion of her SNAP benefits for cash in order to purchase drugs for 3+ years. At some point, the situation went horribly wrong, causing the female perpetrator to turn violent towards Armani, alleging that he stole money from her EBT card, when in fact she ultimately admitted to a Dallas PD homicide detective that she had provided Armani with her personal PIN number to gain access to her EBT card. However, it's unclear why Armani failed to report any of these assaults against him to the authorities, and unfortunately, law enforcement decided that he was a victim whose death was not worth investigating until his Aunt Robin started putting pressure on them. But the mindset that myself and many other true crime podcasters have is that every murder victim, no matter who they are and what they may have done, does not deserve to have their life stolen and is entitled to receive justice. And of course, when law enforcement ignores crimes like Armani's, they are enabling the perpetrator or perpetrators to get away with murder. Now, we have one known female perpetrator and 2 male perpetrators who are suspected of having involvement in Armani's tragic death, but like I said earlier, since they have never been publicly named by law enforcement thus far, we will not use their names here. One of these 2 male perpetrators is no longer a threat to the public since he was shot to death in 2019, and the other one, who had once been in an intimate same-sex relationship with Armani, was recently released from state prison last October after serving 7 years of an 8-year sentence for unrelated assault charges. We know that all 3 of these known perpetrators waged a personal vendetta against Armani, and the female suspect who repeatedly harassed and threatened him and assaulted him no less than 3 times is still walking free today. While the known female perpetrator and the same-sex partner were questioned at various points, none of these 3 suspects were ever taken to the police station for a formal interview. So to recap, the known female perpetrator and her 2 teenage sons allegedly attacked Armani at a strip mall during the week of May the 22nd, 2017, and this prompted him to pretty much confine himself to his residence for the next 8 days. Since the female perpetrator was unable to physically locate Armani during that time frame, she then decided to spend May the 30th relentlessly bombarding him with threatening and harassing phone calls at his home for about 24 straight hours. It's obvious that she was trying to lure Armani outside and continued her harassing phone calls on May the 31st, but when this didn't work, she finally took the step of firing a bullet through the living room window, which finally drew Armani and his mother out of the home and led to him being violently assaulted by the female perpetrator for the second time. Considering that there's literally a 21-second video of this violent assault, which was posted on Facebook and shared with law enforcement, it blows my mind that the original detective did not believe this merited a more extensive investigation into Armani's disappearance and tragic death. This shooting was reported to the police, so it is documented, but since law enforcement purposely allowed the statute of limitations to expire, the person who fired the bullet may never be charged for this crime, until and unless the deadly conduct with firearm criminal offense case is reopened, which Armani's Aunt Robin has officially requested. But the actual police report of this incident is a mess of contradictory and inaccurate information, since we have separate sentences which describe a quote-unquote known suspect and a quote-unquote unknown suspect firing the shot into Armani's home. It also lists an innocent individual as being the shooter, and Robin has no idea where the alleged accusation came from. So this indicates that someone may have been feeding the police officer false information, or he was just incredibly sloppy at his job when creating the report. This whole incident has been a source of never-ending frustration for Armani's family, as the original detective initially tried to tell them that no bullet was ever recovered from Armani's home, even though crime scene photos clearly show that a bullet was collected as evidence on the day of the shooting. Armani's family have been hoping to have the Bardol method performed on the bullet, as it could potentially extract DNA that the shooter left behind on the bullet before putting ammunition into the gun and firing it. Of course, even if DNA is extracted and linked to a specific suspect, they will not be charged with anything involving this crime if this case isn't reopened, since law enforcement purposely allowed the 2-year statute of limitations to expire, even though Robin continually asked about the status of the bullet during those 2 years. Regardless, extracting the shooter's DNA could be an important step at gradually building a case against the 2 remaining living suspects for their culpability in Armani's brutal murder. Ironically, former Dallas Assistant Chief of Police Avery Moore authorized and approved forensic testing on the bullet on June 17, 2019, during an in-person meeting with Robin, even though the 2-year statute of limitations had already expired by that point. So the last reported assault against Armani took place on June 3, 2017, the same day he suddenly disappeared after receiving first aid and a cell phone number from his 2 friends. The following day, on June 4th, the known female perpetrator involved in the violent assaults against Armani filed a false police report alleging that Armani had assaulted her, when in fact, some bystanders' account of what actually happened is that Armani left the female perpetrator with a black eye because he was defending himself against the woman and her male accomplice who was holding Armani down while the female suspect violently assaulted him. But this does make me wonder if the black eye was the breaking point which caused the June 3rd assault against Armani to escalate into murder the next time he crossed paths with the female suspect that same day. Filing the police report was an attempt to draw police attention away from herself in an effort to cover up and escalate a false narrative for her and the co-perpetrators, because they knew that Armani was no longer around to refute her alleged assault accusation. We know that very few of Armani's remains were eventually found in the vacant residential lot located just around the corner from where he lived with his mother, but we don't know the series of events which took place after he received first aid from his 2 friends and parted ways with them. Was Armani killed in that lot, or did the perpetrators murder him elsewhere before dumping his body in the lot, since it was just around the corner from where he lived? Armani's remains were only discovered because a local resident happened to see a neighbor's dog carrying Armani's skull in his mouth and was one of the 2 people to call 911. Since a few of Armani's bones were found near the tree line of a wooded area in this vacant residential lot, apparently Armani's body was concealed there during the 7-week period he was missing, and it's only by pure chance that this neighborhood dog happened to pick up his skull and move it out into the open on July 24, 2017. In April of 2023, Dallas's NBC5 news outlet produced a cold case segment about this case, in which Robin was interviewed by reporter Candace Sweat at the location of this vacant residential lot. By pure coincidence, Larry, one of the 2 911 callers, just so happened to pass by driving his vehicle while Candace Sweat and Robin were filming at the crime scene location, so Robin got to meet Larry for the first time, and the cameraman was able to capture footage of him recounting his unexpected discovery of what would later be identified as Robin's nephew, Armani. Robin thanked Larry for what he did, acknowledging that if he had not noticed the skull in the dog's mouth and called 911, Armani would still be a missing person to this day, and his mother wouldn't have known what happened to him, nor would she have gotten the opportunity to lay him to rest. While canine search and rescue found very few of Armani's skeletal remains along the tree line, one particular canine dog hinted that there might be additional remains in the wooded area, but unfortunately, Dallas PD Homicide did not feel compelled to return to the crime scene after July 24, 2017, to perform an additional search until Robin challenged the current homicide detective about conducting a new canine search in early August of 2024. And to this day, Robin hasn't been provided with an update regarding the new search that was supposed to have been completed within the past year. Some of Armani's personal items were found at the scene, including his hairbrush, an article of clothing, and his purse, which contained a cell phone number, that led the original detective to a friend who in turn alerted Armani's family, which is how they learned about his tragic death. The clothing had rips and tears in them that could have been caused by a large blade, which is particularly interesting since his former same-sex partner was known for threatening people, including Armani, with a machete. I think the discovery of this purse may have played a part in the misinformation about Armani being transgender, and the fact that his purse contained drug paraphernalia probably influenced the original detective's personal predetermined theory and false narrative about Armani overdosing in the vacant residential lot. Perhaps the most bizarre clue was that Armani's purse happened to contain a key fob for a Chrysler car, even though Armani did not own a vehicle. So did any of the three individuals who were suspected of being involved in his death drive a Chrysler or have access to one at that time? Police made no attempt to trace this key fob back to a specific vehicle, and I would be curious to see if forensic testing would be able to extract any DNA from these items. If DNA was extracted from the bullet, and it happened to match any DNA extracted from these items, that would be pretty incriminating. So according to Robin, during the time period Armani was missing, the known female perpetrator spoke to at least one person in which she shared what happened to Armani, yet some of the specific details the female perpetrator did provide turned out to be accurate when very few of Armani's remains were found. However, the problem is that it seems like whenever the female perpetrator has done or said anything incriminating, none of the first-hand witnesses to these events have been willing to come forward and go on the record with law enforcement, probably out of fear. It's kind of a catch-22, because if the police had actually performed a stronger investigation and were motivated to question these people, they might be more willing to talk. To recap, a petition has been started for Armani at change.org, and some of the things that his loved ones are requesting from law enforcement are to immediately release funds for forensic testing involving specific case evidence that can officially change Armani's current cause and manner of death from undetermined to homicide. His family is specifically requesting forensic testing on the bullet that was fired into Armani and his mother's home, as well as for them to conduct an expanded search of the crime scene for additional skeletal remains and additional evidence. Yes, I know there isn't a whole lot of facts made known to the public, but at the very least, turning the case into an official homicide investigation will finally prompt people to talk and bring new information to the surface. By no means was Armani a perfect individual, and he made his fair share of mistakes, but he also did not deserve to be murdered. There are a lot of people out there who love and care about Armani and really want to see him receive justice. Robin has said that Armani shared the same birthday as her oldest daughter, December the 19th, emotionally expressing the fact that it's always a bittersweet feeling every year to try and celebrate her daughter's birthday while grieving the tragic loss of Armani at the same time. So I want to deliver a special thanks to Robin for sharing Armani's story with me, as she's done an excellent job at spreading awareness about his death and keeping his memory alive. And another special thanks to Haley Gray and Gabby Petito's mother, Nicole Schmidt, for helping to secure digital billboard space donated to Armani's family by Lamar Advertising Company in May of this past year, as they hope this will pave the way to a major break in Armani's unsolved murder investigation. So if you happen to have any information about the death of Armani Morgan, please contact the Dallas Police Department Special Investigations Unit at 214-671-3677. That's 214-671-3677. Also in our show notes, I will be sharing a link to the aforementioned petition at change.org. But if you just have your own thoughts about what happened in this case, feel free to leave me a comment or send me an email to robin.warder@icloud.com. That's robin.warder@icloud.com. Now the reminder that The Trail Went Cold is on Patreon, so please visit patreon.com/thetrailwentcold to learn how you can support our podcast and become eligible for some pretty neat rewards. Over the past 7 years, our Patreon page has released nearly 90 exclusive bonus episodes, which are all currently available in our archives for our patrons in tiers 2 and 3. This past month, I released a bonus episode about the bizarre and baffling 2001 murder of real estate agent Mike Emmert, which is technically considered to be solved, but still has a bunch of unanswered questions. I've also released an exclusive bonus episode for my spin-off podcast, The Path Went Chilly, in which myself and one of my co-hosts, Jules, discuss the 2001 disappearance and murder of Margie Dabney, an elderly woman who somehow went missing from an airport, appropriately enough, in Dallas. And for our patrons in Tier 3, I've recorded another new audio commentary track, which can be played over a classic episode of Unsolved Mysteries, and we now have nearly 80 of these commentary tracks in archives. I'd also like to give a shout out to our most recent listener who has signed up with us on Patreon this week, Darla J. Thank you so much for your support. And before I bring this episode to a close, I'd like to play a promo for another true crime podcast, Killer Heart to Hearts.
Killer Heart to Hearts is a narrative true crime podcast that brings receipts. We pull from primary sources, court records, and interviews, keeping the focus on the victims and the communities around them. The tone is documentary style, with a restrained dark edge and a pinch of gallows humor that never cheapens the story, as each episode traces the timeline and highlights the line between evidence and theory. New episodes every Monday. Follow Killer Heart to Hearts wherever you get your podcasts.
I just wanted to give another shout out to my supporters at the Unsolved Mysteries message board at the Sitcoms Online forum and the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit. I need to provide a big thanks to Miguel Foote, who edits and assembles this podcast together for me, and Vince Nitro, who composed the eerie music you hear on every episode. If you haven't already, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, or leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube Music, Podcast Addict, or whatever your favorite podcasting platform is. So have yourselves a great week and join us next Wednesday for another brand new episode of The Trail Went Cold.